Everyone thought Sarah was the weak one. For 3 weeks, she sat in that courtroom, stone-faced, while her husband, Michael, painted her as a monster. He charmed the jury, he dazzled the press. He thought he had committed the perfect crime and found the perfect scapegoat. He was winning. In fact, he was minutes away from walking free. But Michael forgot one thing. Arrogance is a blinder. He didn't know that Sarah wasn't silent because she was scared. She was silent because she was waiting for him to say just one specific lie, waiting for the judge to ask about that one night. The courtroom in downtown Seattle was packed so tight that the air conditioner struggled to keep the humidity down. It smelled of wet wool, cheap coffee, and desperation. At the defense table sat Michael Sterling. Even under the harsh fluorescent lights, he looked like he belonged on a yacht, not facing a life sentence. His suit was a bespoke Navy Armani, his hair a perfect sweep of sandy blonde, and his face wore an expression of tragic nobility. He wasn't just defending his innocence, he was performing it. Next to him sat his attorney, arguably the most expensive shark in Washington state, a man named Richard Thorne. Wait, no Thorne, let's go with Richard Sterling. No. Related? No. Let's use Richard Caldwell. Caldwell was whispering something into Michael's ear, and Michael nodded solemnly. On the other side of the aisle, separated by a few feet of mahogany and a canyon of hatred, sat Sarah Sterling. If Michael was the sun, Sarah was a shadow. She wore a gray cardigan that seemed 2 sizes too big, swallowing her petite frame. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, highlighting the dark circles under her eyes. She stared at the table in front of her, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. To the jury, she looked guilty. She looked like a woman crushed by the weight of what she had done. Or so they thought. The case was sensational, the Sterling Manor fire. It had dominated the headlines for 6 months. Michael and Sarah Sterling were the power couple of the Pacific Northwest real estate scene. Michael was the face, the charm, the handshakes, the TV interviews. Sarah was the brain, the numbers, the logistics, the unseen force. But 3 months ago, their sprawling Victorian estate on the cliffs overlooking the Sound had burned to the ground. Tragically, Sarah's younger brother, David, who had been staying in the guest cottage, didn't make it out. The prosecution's theory was simple, brutal, and compelling. Sarah, jealous of her brother's recent inheritance and mentally unstable after a miscarriage, had set the fire to kill him and claim the money. Michael was the grieving husband, the man who had tried to save them all, the man who had barely escaped with his life. Mr. Sterling, the prosecutor, a bulldog of a woman named Miss Halloway, began, her voice echoing in the hush. "Can you walk us through the events of November 14th? Michael stood up. He didn't just stand. He rose. He turned slightly toward the jury, offering them a vulnerable, sad smile. "I can try," Michael said, his voice breaking perfectly on the last word, "though I wish I could forget it." He launched into his story. It was a masterpiece of fiction. He described the smell of smoke waking him up. He described shaking Sarah, who he claimed was in a trance-like state, at the foot of the bed, holding a lighter. He described the heat, the panic, his desperate run to the guest cottage to save David, only to be beaten back by a wall of flames. "I screamed for him," Michael said, a single tear tracking down his cheek. "I screamed until my throat bled. But the fire, it was like a living thing. And when I looked back at the main house, Sarah was just standing on the lawn, watching, just watching." The jury ate it up. Juror number 4, a grandmotherly woman in the front row, was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Michael wasn't just a witness. He was a widower in spirit, betrayed by the woman he loved. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't shout, "Liar." She didn't sob. She just sat there, her gaze fixed on a scratch in the wood of the defendant's table. What Michael didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Sarah wasn't looking at a scratch. She was replaying a memory of a conversation she'd heard through a thin wall 3 days before the fire. A conversation Michael thought was private. He thought she was broken. He thought she was the perfect victim because she had always been the quiet one. But he forgot that the quiet ones are the ones who listen. The trial had been going on for 2 weeks. The evidence against Sarah was circumstantial but damning. Her fingerprints were on the gas can found in the garage, which she used for the lawnmower, she had told the police, but they didn't believe her. A diary had been found conveniently half-burnt, where she seemingly wrote about her hatred for David. Sarah knew the handwriting was a near-perfect forgery, likely practiced by Michael for months. Michael was destroying her, brick by brick, and she was letting him. Because Sarah knew something about the law that Michael, for all his expensive lawyers, didn't quite grasp. Once he committed to a story on the stand, under oath, he was locked in. If she could prove he lied about one massive, foundational fact, the whole tower would come down. She just needed him to get to the night of the 14th. Specifically, the timeline. You said you were in bed by 10 p.m., is that correct? Holloway asked. Yes, Michael nodded. We had a quiet dinner. Sarah was agitated. I tried to calm her down. We went up around 10. I fell asleep shortly after. Sarah's lawyer, a court-appointed public defender named Mr. Abernathy, looked at Sarah. He looked defeated. He had urged her to take a plea deal. Manslaughter, he'd said. You'll be out in 8 years. Sarah had refused. No deal, she had whispered. Let him talk. Just let him talk. Abernathy scribbled on his notepad. He's killing us. Sarah took the pen from his hand and wrote back, Not yet. The cross-examination was supposed to be Abernathy's moment, but he was struggling. Michael was slippery. Every question Abernathy fired at him, Michael deflected with polite confusion or emotional devastation. Mr. Sterling, Abernathy stammered, shuffling his papers. You stated that Sarah was holding a lighter. What color was it? Blue, Michael said instantly. It was a cheap, blue plastic lighter. I'd never seen it before. And you didn't try to take it from her? I was in shock, Michael exclaimed, turning to the jury, palms up. My house was on fire. My wife was standing there like a ghost. I panicked. I ran to save David. And you're sure about the time? 10 p.m.? You went to bed? Absolutely. I remember looking at the digital clock on the nightstand just before I turned off the lamp. It was 10:03 p.m. Sarah closed her eyes. 10:03 p.m. He was doubling down. Good. To understand why this mattered, you have to go back 6 months. The Sterling marriage had been rotting from the inside for years. Michael was a gambler. Not the poker night with the boys kind of gambler, but the high stakes, leverage the company, borrow from sharks kind. Sarah had found the bank statements hidden in a hollowed-out book in his study. He had drained their savings. He had mortgaged the guest cottage. And worst of all, he had borrowed money from Victor Kresh, a man known in Seattle not for real estate, but for breaking kneecaps. When Sarah confronted him, Michael had wept. He begged. He promised to change. He told her he had a plan to fix everything. He just needed time. Sarah, blindingly in love and terrified of scandal, had agreed to give him 6 months. Then, David moved in. David was Sarah's brother, a software developer who had just sold his startup for $4 million. He was staying in the guest cottage while he looked for a house in the city. Michael saw David not as a brother-in-law, but as a walking ATM. Sarah began to notice things. Michael would bring David expensive scotch. He would insist on giving David tours of investment properties. He was grooming him. But David was smart. He didn't trust Michael. 3 days before the fire, Sarah had come home early from a charity luncheon. She had a migraine. She entered the house through the mudroom, kicking off her heels so she walked silently in her stockings. She heard voices in the study. I can't lend you the money, Mike. David's voice was firm. I know about the debts. Sarah doesn't know the extent of it, does she? She knows enough. Michael's voice was tight, dangerous. Look, Dave, I'm in a hole, a deep one. Kresh is going to come for me. Then go to the police, David said. I'm not throwing my buyout money into a black hole. And honestly, I think you need to tell Sarah the truth, or I will. There was a long silence. Then Michael laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. You're right, Dave. You're absolutely right. I'll handle it. Sarah had retreated to the kitchen, her heart hammering. She planned to confront Michael that weekend. She planned to leave him. She planned to take David and get as far away as possible, but she waited too long. Now, in court, the prosecutor was wrapping up her questioning of Michael. "Mr. Sterling," Holloway asked, "did you love your brother-in-law?" "He was like a brother to me," Michael lied. "I loved him." "And your wife?" Michael looked at Sarah. His eyes were cold, dead sharks in a sea of blue. "I loved the woman she was. I don't know who this is." The courtroom let out a collective sigh of sympathy. That evening, after court adjourned, Abernathy visited Sarah in the holding cell. "Sarah, we need to change tactics," he pleaded. "The jury hates you. Michael is coming off as a saint. If you don't testify, if you don't tell your side, you're going away for life." "No," Sarah said. Her voice was raspy from disuse. "I don't testify. Not yet." "Why?" Abernathy exploded. "Give me something. Anything. Why are you letting him spin this narrative?" "Because," Sarah said, leaning forward, the overhead bulb casting long shadows over her face. "He's telling a story about a fire. But the fire isn't the crime, Mr. Abernathy. The fire is the cover-up. Cover-up for what? For what happened at 8:30 p.m. before he claims we went to bed." Abernathy looked confused. "But the coroner said David died of smoke inhalation. The fire killed him." "Did he?" Sarah asked. "Or did the coroner assume that, because the body was so badly burned, she reached into her jumpsuit pocket, a violation of protocol, but the guards had been lax, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a receipt. "Investigate this," she said, sliding it across the metal table. Abernathy picked it up. It was a receipt from a gas station in Portland, Oregon, dated November 14th. Time, 7:15 p.m. "Portland is 3 hours away," Abernathy said. "If Michael was here—" "Michael wasn't in Portland," Sarah said. "Look at the items purchased." Abernathy squinted. 2 gallons of gas, a pack of gum, and a prepaid burner phone. "Who bought this?" Abernathy asked. "Victor Kresh," Sarah said. "Or one of his men." "Sarah, what are you getting at?" "Michael didn't set the fire alone," she whispered. "He hired it out, but he was too arrogant to leave the house. He wanted to be the hero who survived. He needed to be seen there, but he messed up the timing. He says he went to bed at 10. He says he was with me. And, Sarah smiled, a terrifying, thin smile. At 10 p.m. on November 14th, the power was out at Sterling Manor. A transformer blew down the road. The digital clocks weren't working. He just swore under oath that he looked at the digital clock at 10:03 p.m. Abernathy's eyes went wide. That's perjury, but it's a small detail. It won't clear you of murder. It's the first thread, Sarah said. Pull it, and the whole sweater unravels. But that's not the bombshell, Mr. Abernathy. The bombshell is where I was at 10 p.m. You were? In the trance? At the foot of the bed? No, Sarah said. I wasn't even in the house. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with a different energy. Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, looked like a man who had chugged 3 espressos and hadn't slept. He had the energy of a man holding a grenade, waiting to pull the pin. Mr. Sterling, Abernathy began, pacing in front of the witness stand. I'd like to revisit your timeline of the night of the fire. You are absolutely certain you looked at the digital clock on your nightstand at 10:03 p.m.? Michael sighed, an exasperated sound that suggested he was dealing with a slow child. Yes, Mr. Abernathy, as I said yesterday, it's burned into my memory. And this clock, Abernathy gestured to an evidence photo on the screen, a charred remnant of a digital alarm clock. This was the clock? Yes, a Sony Dream Machine. I've had it for years. Does it have a battery backup? Michael frowned slightly. He sensed a trap but couldn't see the teeth yet. I believe so. Yes, it must. You believe so? Or you know so? I know so, Michael said firmly. Because the power flickers out there sometimes. The clock always stays on. Abernathy smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Defense Exhibit D into evidence. This is the official outage report from Snohomish County PUD for the night of November 14th. He handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge and then to the prosecution. Miss Halloway scanned it, her eyebrows knitting together. According to this report, Abernathy's voice rose. A drunk driver struck a utility pole on Route 9 at 9:45 p.m. Power was cut to the entire sector, including Sterling Manor, at 9:46 p.m. It wasn't restored until 4 a.m. the next morning. Michael shrugged. So, like I said, battery backup. Defense Exhibit E, Abernathy announced, holding up a manual. The user manual for the Sony ICF C1 model found on your nightstand. Page 4 explicitly states, this model does not support battery backup for the time display. In the event of power loss, the display will go blank. The courtroom went dead silent. Michael blinked. Once, twice. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking less like a golden boy and more like a statue made of wax. Michael stammered. I must have checked my phone. Yes, that's it. I checked my phone. Your phone? Abernathy flipped a page on his notepad. The iPhone 14 Pro, found in your jacket pocket? The one the forensic team analyzed? It was dead, Mr. Sterling. The battery died at 8:15 p.m. that night. You didn't plug it in? Because presumably, the power was out. I guessed, Michael shouted, his composure cracking. I guessed the time. Does it matter? My house was burning down. My wife was standing there with a lighter. Who cares if it was 10:03 or 10:05? It matters, Abernathy said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because if you lied about the time to establish an alibi, what else are you lying about? You weren't in bed at 10 p.m., were you, Michael? Because if you were, you would have been sitting in the pitch dark. Miss Halloway stood up. Objection. Badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Harrison said, though he was peering at Michael over his spectacles with a look of intense curiosity. Move on, counselor. Abernathy moved on, but the damage was done. The jury was shifting in their seats. They were looking at Michael differently now. He wasn't the grieving hero anymore. He was a man who had just been caught in a lie. But Sarah knew this was just the jab. The knockout punch was still to come. The prosecution rested their case on Thursday afternoon. On Friday morning, the defense called their first and only witness. The defense calls Sarah Sterling to the stand. A ripple of shock went through the gallery. Defendants rarely testified in murder trials. It was too risky. If Sarah crumbled under cross-examination, it was over. Sarah walked to the stand. She didn't look at the jury. She didn't look at the audience. She looked straight at Michael. And for the first time in the trial, Michael looked away. Abernathy guided her through the early questions. Her background, her relationship with David, the financial troubles. Sarah spoke softly, but clearly. She didn't cry. She recounted the discovery of Michael's gambling debts with a clinical detachment that was more chilling than tears. Let's go to the night of November 14th, Abernathy said. Where were you at 10 p.m.? I was in the driveway, Sarah said. Doing what? Hiding, she said. Hiding from whom? From my husband. Sarah took a deep breath. I had told Michael that afternoon that I was leaving him. I told him I had spoken to a forensic accountant. I told him I knew he had forged David's signature on a life insurance policy application. The courtroom gasped. This was new information. He got very quiet, Sarah continued. He told me to go take a nap. He made me tea. I didn't drink it. I poured it in the plant pot in the bedroom. I was terrified. I pretended to sleep. When I heard him go downstairs, I slipped out the back door. And what did you see? I saw Michael walking toward the guest cottage, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. He was carrying a red canister, not the blue one he claimed I had, a red one. Did you stop him? I was a coward, Sarah whispered, a tear finally escaping. I didn't think he would hurt David. I thought maybe he was just scaring him, or burning trash. I crouched behind the SUV. I watched him go to the cottage door. He didn't knock. He locked it. He locked it? From the outside, Sarah said. The cottage door has a heavy deadbolt that keys from both sides, but there's a slide bolt on the outside for storm security. He slid it shut. Then he went around the back, where the ventilation intake is. A few minutes later, I saw the glow. And then he ran back to the main house. He went inside. I stayed by the car, frozen. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't work. About 5 minutes later, he came running out, screaming, acting like he had just woken up. He saw me standing there. He grabbed me. He shook me. He whispered in my ear, "If you say a word, you're next. The police will never believe you. You're the crazy one. Remember?" Miss Holloway, the prosecutor, shot up for cross-examination like a missile. She was furious. "Mrs. Sterling," Holloway sneered, "this is a fantastic story, truly. But where is the proof? Where is this red canister? Where is the forensic accountant you supposedly called?" "I never got to make the call," Sarah said. "He smashed my phone." "Convenient," Holloway scoffed. "And the tea? The poisoned tea?" "Test the soil," Sarah said calmly. "The plant in the master bedroom, a ficus. Test the soil for crushed sleeping pills." "I doubt the fire reached that corner of the room." Holloway paused. She looked at her notes. She hadn't expected that. "You watched your brother burn," Holloway said, changing tactics, her voice dripping with disgust. "You claim you stood there and did nothing?" "I was in shock. I was terrified of him." Sarah pointed a shaking finger at Michael. "Or," Holloway countered, "you are a cold-blooded killer who is making up a story to save her own skin." "I am not making it up," Sarah cried out. "Then why didn't you go to the police immediately? Why wait 3 weeks?" "Because," Sarah said, her eyes hardening, "I needed him to think he had won. I needed him to testify. I needed him to lie under oath so you would all see what he is." "No further questions," Holloway snapped, clearly feeling she had rattled the defendant. But Sarah wasn't rattled. She was just getting started. The trial was winding down. The jury looked exhausted. They were torn. Sarah's story was compelling, but it was just a story. There was no physical evidence linking Michael to the fire, only his lie about the clock. It was a he said, she said of the highest order. Michael was recalled to the stand for a rebuttal. He was calm again, his mask back in place. He denied everything Sarah said. He called her delusional. He claimed the red canister never existed. He claimed he never locked the door. "She's sick," Michael said, looking at the jury with pleading eyes. "I tried to help her. I tried to save her from herself. And now she's trying to destroy me." He finished his testimony. He stood up to leave the witness box. "Mr. Sterling," a deep voice boomed. It was Judge Harrison. Throughout the trial, Judge Harrison had been a quiet figure, ruling on objections with a wave of his hand, mostly looking bored. But now, he was leaning forward, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was flipping through a notebook. "Please remain seated," the judge said. Michael sat back down, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Yes, Your Honor?" "I have a question," Judge Harrison said. "It's about a detail you mentioned earlier in the week. A seemingly minor detail, but it's been bothering me." The courtroom went silent. When a judge asks a question, it's usually clarification. But Judge Harrison's tone suggested something else. It suggested he had found a loose thread. "You testified on Tuesday," the judge began, looking at his notes, "about the maintenance of the property. You wanted to show what a diligent homeowner you were." "Yes, Your Honor," Michael said, confident. "I took care of everything." "You specifically mentioned the night of November 1st, the judge said. Sarah's head snapped up. "November 1st, that was 2 weeks before the fire. You said," the judge continued, "that on the night of November 1st, there was a heavy storm. You were worried about the guest cottage roof. You went out there around 11 p.m. to check for leaks, is that correct?" Michael nodded. "Yes, sir. It was raining hard. I wanted to make sure David was dry." "And you testified that you went into the attic of the guest cottage to check the insulation?" "I did." "And you used a flashlight?" "Yes." "And," the judge paused, looking directly into Michael's eyes, "you said you saw nothing amiss, no leaks, and you came back to the main house." "That is correct," Michael said. "Why?" "Because, Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, "I am looking at the weather report for Snohomish County for November 1st. Michael froze. There was no storm on November 1st. the judge said. It was a clear night, full moon, 55 degrees. Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. I might have the date wrong. Maybe it was October 31st, or November 2nd. Perhaps, the judge said. But you were very specific. You said it was November 1st, because that was the night you missed the Seahawks game to do repairs. The Seahawks played on Monday night, November 1st. Michael swallowed hard. Okay, so it was raining. Maybe the weather report is wrong? It happens. Maybe, the judge said. But here is the problem, Mr. Sterling. You said you went into the attic of the guest cottage. Yes? The guest cottage at Sterling Manor, the judge said, picking up a blueprint from the stack of evidence that hadn't been discussed much. It doesn't have an attic. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a vacuum. It has a vaulted ceiling, the judge continued, tapping the blueprint. Open beams from the floor to the roof ridge. There is no crawl space. There is no hatch. There is no attic to check. Michael stared at the judge. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. So, Judge Harrison said, taking off his glasses, if you weren't in the attic checking for leaks, where were you on the night of November 1st? And why did you feel the need to invent a trip to a non-existent room during a non-existent storm? Sarah watched Michael's face. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. He hadn't been checking the attic. On November 1st, he had been up on the roof, not checking for leaks. He had been clogging the chimney flue. He had been tampering with the ventilation. Quote, he had been setting the stage for a fire that would look like an accident. And in his arrogance, in his desire to paint himself as the perfect, caring landlord, he had invented a detail he thought sounded good. I checked the attic. Michael rasped. I misspoke. I meant the shed. I checked the shed. The shed, the judge repeated, deadpan. You checked the shed for roof leaks during a storm that didn't happen? Yes, Michael shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. I got confused. It's been a trauma. Why are you persecuting me? I am not persecuting you, Mr. Sterling, the judge said, coldly. I am testing your credibility, and right now, it is failing. The judge looked at the prosecutor. Miss Halloway, do you have any redirect based on the witness's confusion? Miss Halloway looked at Michael. She looked at the blueprint. She looked at the jury, who were now staring at Michael with open hostility. No, Your Honor, Halloway said quietly. She sat down. She knew a sinking ship when she saw one. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end. Michael was cornered, and a cornered animal bites. Michael stood up, his face red with rage. He pointed at Sarah. She told you to ask that, he screamed at the judge. She put this in your head. She's manipulating everyone. Sit down, Mr. Sterling, the bailiff barked, moving closer. I won't sit down, Michael yelled. I did everything for this family. I fixed the mess. I did what had to be done. The courtroom gasped. I did what had to be done. It wasn't a confession, but it was close. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice like thunder. Sit down, or I will hold you in contempt. Michael collapsed into the chair. He was breathing hard. He looked at Sarah. She held his gaze. And then, she mouthed one word. Checkmate? No. She mouthed, blue. Michael's eyes widened. He remembered. The lighter. He said it was blue. Sarah reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside was a charred, melted lump of blue plastic. She slammed it onto the defense table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Abernathy, Sarah said loud enough for the microphone to catch. Ask him about the lighter again. The silence that descended upon the courtroom was absolute. A physical weight that pressed against the eardrums of every soul present. It wasn't merely the absence of noise. It was the vacuum created when a narrative one meticulously constructed over 3 weeks suddenly collapses. The air conditioner hummed, a low, mechanical drone that seemed to mock the tension in the room. All eyes were glued to the defense table. There, resting on a pristine white legal pad, sat a small, grotesque object. It was a lump of blue plastic, warped by intense heat, its edges curled and blackened like a dead leaf. To the uninitiated, it looked like trash. To Sarah Sterling, it was the key to a cage. Judge Harrison leaned over the bench, his glasses sliding further down his nose. He squinted at the object, his brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and irritation. "Mr. Abernathy," the judge's voice boomed, breaking the spell, "you have introduced an object that was not on the discovery list. You have slammed it onto the table with a theatricality I usually associate with television, not my courtroom. Explain yourself immediately, or I will hold you in contempt." Mr. Abernathy stood. He looked different than he had at the start of the trial. The slump in his shoulders was gone. He buttoned his suit jacket with a deliberate, slow precision. "Your Honor," Abernathy began, his voice steady, "this is Defense Exhibit F. It is a piece of physical evidence that my client, Mrs. Sterling, recovered from the scene of the fire. She has kept it in her possession, sealed in an airtight bag, since the night of November 14th. Objection. Miss Holloway, the prosecutor, shot out of her chair as if propelled by a spring. Her face was flushed. This is trial by ambush. The defense cannot produce surprise evidence in the 11th hour. We have no chain of custody. We have no way of verifying where that debris came from. It is inadmissible, and Counselor Abernathy knows it. It is relevant, Your Honor," Abernathy countered, his voice rising over hers, "because the witness, the defendant, Mr. Sterling, just opened the door to it. Under the rules of evidence, I am allowed to introduce impeachment evidence without prior disclosure if it contradicts a specific claim made by a witness on the stand." Abernathy pointed a shaking finger at Michael, who was still sitting in the witness box, looking like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "Mr. Sterling just testified, under oath, that my client was holding a blue lighter. He was specific about the color. He was specific about the type. This object," Abernathy gestured to the melted lump, "is a blue lighter. But more importantly, it proves that Michael Sterling is lying about what happened inside that guest cottage." Judge Harrison looked from Holloway to Abernathy, and finally to Michael. The judge was a man who respected the law, but he was also a man who despised liars. He waved a hand at Holloway. "Overruled. I will allow it for impeachment purposes only, but Mr. Abernathy, this better be good." Abernathy picked up the object with a handkerchief. He held it up to the light. "To the naked eye, this appears to be a standard, disposable butane lighter," Abernathy explained, turning to the jury. "The kind you buy at a gas station for $2, but David, the victim, was not a standard man. He was a software engineer. He was paranoid about corporate espionage. He didn't trust the cloud. He didn't trust servers." Abernathy walked toward the jury box, holding the object out so they could see the charred remains. David carried his most sensitive data on him at all times. This is not just a lighter. It is a high-end, encrypted surveillance device disguised as a lighter. The USB port is concealed in the base. It is designed to record audio when the flint is struck, but the gas is not engaged. It's a dead man's switch for data. Michael's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The handsome, tragic mask dissolved. His skin turned a sickly, translucent gray. His eyes, usually so bright and engaging, went wide and vacant as he gripped the wooden railing of the witness stand so hard that the blood drained from his hands, leaving them looking like claws. "Mrs. Sterling found this in the wet grass near the guest cottage," Abernathy continued, his voice dropping to a hush. "The fire crews were still working. She saw the glint of blue. She knew what David carried. And she knew that if she gave it to the police that Michael had already charmed, police that were already looking at her with suspicion, it might disappear. So she kept it. She waited. She waited for Michael to lie about the lighter." Abernathy returned to his table. He opened his laptop. He produced a cable. He plugged the charred, melted device into the computer. The courtroom held its breath. The silence was agonizing. A few jurors leaned forward, their hands gripping their knees. Even the bailiff had moved closer, his hand resting unconsciously on his belt. "The device was damaged," Abernathy said, typing a password, "but the memory chip is solid state. It survived." He looked up at the judge. "May I, Your Honor?" Proceed, the judge whispered. Abernathy hit the spacebar. The speakers mounted on the courtroom walls crackled. First, there was static, the sound of wind hitting a microphone. Then, the crunch of gravel. Heavy, labored breathing. Sound of a heavy door slamming shut. The metallic slide of a bolt. Michael's voice. I'm sorry, Dave. I really am. The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't the voice of the grieving husband the jury had heard for 3 weeks. It was cold, transactional, devoid of humanity. David's voice muffled, distinct panic. Mike, what are you doing? Unlock this door. It's stuck. The handle won't turn. Michael's voice. It's not stuck. It's over. Kresh gave me a deadline. Midnight tonight. It's you or me, kid. And I choose me. David's voice. Michael, are you crazy? Sarah will know. She'll know everything. Michael's voice. Sarah is going to be the one holding the match, Dave. Or at least, that's what the police will think. She's been so unstable lately. Poor thing. A collective gasp ripped through the courtroom. Juror number 6 covered her mouth with both hands. Miss Holloway, the prosecutor, closed her eyes and lowered her head, realizing her entire case had just incinerated. David's voice. Don't do this. I can help you. We can pay Kresh. Michael's voice. Too late for payments. Goodbye, Dave. Then came the sound that would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Liquid splashing. The heavy glug-glug-glug of an accelerant being poured. The distinct, metallic check-check-check of a lighter being struck repeatedly. Michael's voice, muttering. Damn cheap lighters. Come on. Work, you piece of junk. A sudden, violent whoosh. A roar like a jet engine starting up. David's voice. A scream that tore through the static. Raw and primal. Michael. No. Running footsteps. Heavy panting. The roar of the fire growing louder. Then, the recording cut to black. For 10 seconds, the world stopped. The court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys. The bailiffs stood like statues. Sarah Sterling sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, a single tear, tracking a clean line through the makeup she hadn't touched up in hours. Then, a sound broke the paralysis. It started as a chuckle, low, wet, guttural. Head snapped toward the witness stand. Michael was laughing. He stood up, swaying slightly, his expensive suit now looking like a costume that didn't fit. He looked at the jury, then at the judge, and finally, his gaze locked on Sarah. The laughter grew louder, more frantic, peeling away the layers of sanity he had wrapped around himself. You think you're so smart, Michael sneered. His voice was unrecognizable, a rasp of pure malice. You think this saves you? You sat on that? For 3 weeks? You let me put you through this? I let you hang yourself, Sarah said. She didn't shout. She didn't stand. She spoke with the quiet authority of a woman who had already walked through hell. Michael's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. I did what I had to do, he screamed, spit flying from his lips. He pointed a trembling finger at the gallery, at the invisible ghosts of his creditors. I built this empire. Me. I wasn't going to let some tech brat ruin me over a few bad bets. I fixed it. I fixed everything. Mr. Sterling, sit down. The judge slammed his gavel, the wood cracking against the block. I won't sit down, Michael howled. He lunged over the railing of the witness box, scrambling toward the defense table, his eyes fixed on Sarah's throat. She knew. She watched him die. She's the monster. She's... 2 bailiffs were on him instantly. One tackled him around the waist. The other grabbed his arm. They slammed him into the carpet with a bone-jarring thud. Michael fought them, kicking and thrashing, screaming obscenities that echoed off the high ceilings. Get off me. I am Michael Sterling. I own this town. You can't touch me. They dragged him up, cuffing his hands behind his back. His tie was askew, his hair wild, his eyes manic. As they hauled him toward the side door, he twisted his head back to look at Sarah one last time. You'll never be free of me, Sarah, he shrieked. I'm in your head. I'm in the walls. The heavy oak door slammed shut, cutting off his screams, but the echo remained, bouncing around the silent courtroom like a trapped bird. Judge Harrison slowly took off his glasses. His hands were shaking. He placed them on the bench to steady them. He looked at the prosecution table. Miss Holloway was already standing, looking pale and shaken. She gathered her files with trembling hands. Miss Holloway, the judge said, his voice weary and thick with emotion, I assume the state wishes to address the charges against Sarah Sterling? Miss Holloway didn't look at the jury. She couldn't. Yes, Your Honor. In light of the overwhelming evidence just presented, the state moves to dismiss all charges against the defendant with prejudice. Furthermore, we will be filing charges of first-degree murder, arson, and perjury against Michael Sterling within the hour. Motion granted, the judge said. He didn't bang the gavel. He just set it down gently, as if the noise would shatter the fragile atmosphere. Mrs. Sterling, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled over benches, shouting questions. The gallery buzzed with shock. But Sarah didn't move. She didn't cheer. She didn't smile. She simply looked at the empty spot where her husband had been sitting, and then at the charred piece of plastic on the table. She reached out and touched it, just once. A cold goodbye to a hot nightmare. 3 months later, the media storm had finally died down. Michael Sterling was in solitary confinement, awaiting a trial that would be a mere formality. The Blue Lighter confession was the most downloaded audio clip on the internet. Sarah stood on the cliffs, overlooking the blackened ruin of the guest cottage. The main house had been sold to a developer who planned to bulldoze it. Too many bad memories. A black sedan pulled up the long gravel driveway. A man in a trench coat stepped out. It was Mr. Abernathy. Sarah, he said, walking up to join her at the precipice. I have the final paperwork. The insurance company settled. You're a wealthy woman. I don't want the money, Sarah said, staring at the gray ocean churning below. Donate it, all of it, to the burn unit at Harborview. All of it? Abernathy asked, surprised. Sarah, you have to live. I have enough, she said. Abernathy hesitated. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. There's something I never asked you, he said. During the trial, that day the judge asked about the attic, about November 1st. Sarah turned to him. Her eyes were clear, the dark circles gone. She looked stronger, but harder. What about it? The judge told me privately, Abernathy said, that he received an anonymous package the night before that testimony. It contained the blueprints of the cottage, proving there was no attic, and a certified weather report for November 1st. Sarah said nothing. She turned back to the ocean. He also said, Abernathy continued, his voice lowering, that the return address on the package was a fake, but the handwriting on the note, it looked familiar. It looked like yours, Sarah. Sarah smiled. It wasn't the terrified smile of the victim in court. It was the smile of the woman who had run the Sterling business empire from the shadows for 10 years. Michael always underestimated me, Sarah said softly. He thought I was just the accountant. He forgot that accountants notice details. I knew he would lie about the repairs. He's a narcissist. He can't help but make himself the hero of every story. I knew he would claim he was checking the property during a storm because he used that same excuse on me years ago when he was cheating. So you set him up, Abernathy said, stunned. You fed the judge the question. I gave the judge the map, Sarah corrected. Michael walked into the trap himself. But why? Abernathy asked. Why wait? Why go through the trial? You had the lighter. You could have gone to the police on day one. Sarah turned to face him fully. The wind whipped her hair around her face. If I had gone to the police, she said, her voice cold as ice, Michael would have called Victor Kresh. Kresh has judges in his pocket. Michael would have gotten manslaughter, maybe 5 years. He would have been out in 2. He would have still been rich. He would have won. She looked at the ruins of the cottage where her brother died. I didn't want him in prison, Mr. Abernathy. I wanted him destroyed. I wanted the world to see him for what he really is. I wanted to strip him of his money, his reputation, his freedom, and his pride. I wanted him to think he was winning until the very last second. I wanted him to feel what David felt. Abernathy stared at her. He realized then that the woman standing before him was far more dangerous than Michael Sterling could ever hope to be. She hadn't just survived the fire. She had controlled the burn. "You're terrifying, Sarah," Abernathy whispered. "I'm a widow," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "And justice is a cold business." She walked past him, heading toward her car. "Oh, and Mr. Abernathy?" she called back over her shoulder. "Yes?" "The lighter," she said. "David didn't record that audio. He didn't have a spy lighter. That was just a lighter." Abernathy froze. "What? But the recording? The USB drive?" "I made it," Sarah said. "I recorded their argument through the wall 3 days prior. I edited it. I added the fire sounds. I bought the spy lighter online and planted the file. It was fake evidence. But that's," Abernathy stammered. "That's illegal. If they find out." "They won't," Sarah said, opening her car door. "Because Michael thinks it's real. He remembers saying those words. He remembers the fire. Guilt is a powerful thing, Mr. Abernathy. It fills in the blanks," he confessed. "That's all that matters." She got in the car and drove away, leaving the lawyer standing alone on the cliff, holding a briefcase full of money, realizing he had just won the biggest case of his life, based on a lie that revealed the truth. The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the charred ground. The truth always burns, but sometimes you have to light the match yourself. Sarah Sterling walked away a free woman, but she left behind a question that still haunts the legal world. What is justice? Is it following the rules, or is it ensuring that a monster pays for his crimes, no matter the cost? Michael Sterling is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences. He still screams in his sleep about a blue lighter. He never knew that the piece of plastic that convicted him was just a prop in Sarah's master plan. Sarah proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the courtroom isn't the killer. It's the quiet wife sitting in the corner, waiting for her turn to speak. What do you think? Was Sarah a hero for trapping a murderer? Or did she become a villain by faking the evidence? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We drop new true crime dramas every Tuesday and Friday. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a verdict. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth is out there, but sometimes you have to manufacture it.